am cutting 54-1 and 54-2. And that's going to be in the OpenStax book in chapter 36, section 6. Let's write that on there. 36:6 in the OpenStax book. I like that book. I really wasn't sure for a lot of people who use it, and because it's open source, I don't know if it would be any good, but it's better than the Kindle book that we paid for. Just saying. Alright, so we are going to have a seat. I think it's okay. Again, notice how we explain. I swear, I think every time we start, it's the beginning of this. So when I explain, I have to tell you what these things are interspecific and what that is with competition, and then I have to tell you why it matters. So let's just remind ourselves. It's a what it is, and then it's a why it matters. Like, what am I talking about that is important about that particular piece? So let's see if I can number first. So let's think about what interspecific means. So inter, and I'm saying that like a crazy person, is between. So interspecific, you're going to have competition that's between two different species. So this is between two different species. And that would be like that, what do we have? Urchins and limpets, I think. And so they're different species, they're competing for the same resource, and they said in here, explain how that this competition between these two different species, so I told what this is a negative-negative interaction. And don't go crazy with this being harm. That's not what it means. It just means that it's not benefiting them. Well, I'd rather just have it all myself. I'm an only child, and I get it. So why would I share? In this particular case, you're going to have less. So it's going to be a negative because both get less than they would if they were by themselves. So without competition, I get it all. Even if I outcompete you, I spend energy to compete with you. So otherwise I could just get it all. So it's going to be this negative. So it's not that they're harmed, it's just that they don't both benefit from it. So then they're saying to use this figure. And let me pause and see if I can find that. All right, I found it. So what we have is an example of, first of all, we need to know what a niche is. So for the question, it said, using this figure, explain the differences in a realized niche and a fundamental niche. So a niche is the role in the ecosystem. It's the job. So in this particular case, you have an organism, this Thamellus, that's going to be, you can't read, okay, I gotta put glasses on. So sad. Oh, wow, that's amazing. Okay, so let's look first at the fundamental niche. So Thamellus has the ability to survive in high tide and low tide. So it's going to be able to do its job, and it's going to do its job in the ecosystem, and it can do it dependent upon tide. And it's able to do it in both high tide and low tide when it's by itself. So you could find it here because it's able to survive and be successful and do its job here, high tide, low tide. However, they did an experiment where they added another organism, this Balanus. And so at that point, the Balanus is a better worker, did the job better, in this low tide area and out-competed the thymulus. And so the thymulus now is pushed out of its original large spot, you could find it, high tide, low tide, and you can now only find it doing its job at high tide, in the high tide areas where that it's not going to have as much water all the time. So this tells you that, you could do the job of high tide, low tide, except you can't compete as well with this other organism, this Balanus, and so they're going to force you out of, because there's an exclusion principle that says you both can't do the same job in the same space. One's going to outcompete the other. So in this particular case, I don't have anything I'm competing with. So I can do all of this work, all of this space. But you put me up here with another organism, and I can't compete. They're better at their job down here than I am. So I'm only able to be found doing my job here. So fundamental niche is everywhere you could possibly be found, and a realized niche is where you're found when there's other organisms. So this is what you could do. This is what you do. That's a weird way to say it. So let's go back and write that. Okay, so a realized niche and a fundamental niche, they're both about what role you have. So let's put this in here. So the niche is the role in the ecosystem. So consumer, producer, decomposer, whatever your job is. So a realized niche is going to be where the organisms are found doing their job. A fundamental is going to be everywhere possible. And you really need to think about it. This is without competition, and this is with competition. So I could do my job like everywhere in this space that I've told you. That's my fundamental niche. But it turns out I'm not as good at parts of it as something else, so you won't find me doing my job there. Something else will take over in that area, and because it's better than me at that part of my job. So those are the two differences between there. So a fundamental niche is always larger than the realized niche. Okay, so now we're here. Again, I'm going to have to take 2 pages, no doubt about it. Describe the types of defensive coloration in animals. So, and they have names. So let's go through here. The first one, so this is 3. There's one called cryptic. So cryptic is when you hide. If you think about a crypt, it's a kind of a spot where that you can go and hide things. So this is going to be where the camouflage is. It's a weird way to spell a word. So this is where you're going to blend into your surroundings. And that's one of the ways. Okay, my head is still in the way, no matter where I put it. Okay, so this is going to be defensive coloration. So this is all about hiding, not being seen, or protecting yourself, if you think about it. So here, this one's hiding. So cryptic's the first one. So then we're going to have another one that's called aposematic. Aposematic. And this is where you have coloring that is a warning. So an example of that would possibly be something that's brightly colored. So if you've got a snake that's got red and black, a snake that's got yellow and black, a wasp, all of those are saying, hey, you mess with me and you're going to be sorry because I either taste bad or I'm dangerous or anything about that, but don't mess with me. So you've got warning colors that organism is going to display. The camouflage is going to be dependent on where that organism is found. So you blend in any possible way. So then the next two, people get confused. So I may have to have more space. One is called Batesian, and it's named because the man who actually described it was Bates. And Batesian is like this. You've got two different, totally different things, and one looks like the other one. So you've got the harmless organism, and it's going to mimic something that is harmful. So it looks like the harmful organism, that it's going to be where that this one actually has the warning colors for a reason. It means that it's real. And then this one, so let's say like a bee. Then there's some flies that look like that. They're not, but they look like that. So there's a mimic to where that you're playing off of, you're going to confuse me with this other thing, and you just better not mess with me because you don't know. I could be this harmful thing. So Batesian is going to also be under mimicry, but it's where the harmless organism looks like the harmful. Then there's another one called Müllerism or Müllerin. So, and the weird one is here is, again, this is Müller. And this is where that I'll come back and explain it to you in just a second. But two totally unrelated things have had the same kind of selective pressures, and they've come to looking alike. So, and I don't mean exactly alike, but I mean that they both have possibly the same coloration. So an example here might be a bee and a wasp. They're not related. They don't have the same coloring if they're both like, I don't know, like a yellow jacket and a wasp, whatever, that are yellow and black. They don't have coloration the same because they're related. So they're not related, but through a process, and we'll write about it in a second, called convergent evolution. So let's put buzzword under that because we're going to need to know what that is. So these organisms are not related, but through convergent evolution, they're going to both develop the same warning coloration. So both develop the same warning coloration. So it's just saying for convergent evolution that even though they're different species and they've probably existed in different conditions, the conditions over time that they both exist in are going to select for the same coloration. And we're being very specific here about convergent evolution, but if we weren't doing coloration, it would be for the same feature or trait, would be the more general word. So it's a good thing if you're a bee to be yellow and black. Maybe at some point in time, way back, bees were a lot of different colors. And the ones that had the coloration that stood out lived longer and had more babies. And the same situation happened in a different place in time with wasps, and it ended up where that also standing out was yellow and black. So it's not unusual for organisms to come to the same place when you're having conditions that are pushing toward this type of thing like coloration. So those are the types of coloration. So we've really got this one, this one, this one, and this one. Okay? And the rest of it's just talking about those. So Batesian is mimicry where that, ha ha ha, I'm not harmful, but you think I am. Muellerin is that they're both harmful. They just got to that coloration through conditions where that it was favorable for them to look alike. Because in general, if you think about it, things that are scary, like, you don't mess with that spider. Are you kidding? Look at that. Got a big red spot on it. Or, get away. That snake's scary. Look at his bright colors. So this particular type of push is going to get you to the same place. It just tends to be where that you stand out from the rest, and at that point you were saying, I'm dangerous, or I taste bad. Okay, so in an agricultural area, describe how the 4 types of community interaction, and now they're going to list these for you. Competition, we know what that is. Predation, we know what that is. Herbivory, that's just when an organism eats plants. And symbiosis would be all of those different relationships that organisms have, like mutualism, parasitism, commensalism. So that's what symbiosis is. It literally means to live together. So how might this all come together and develop as we grow food? So I'm going to move this over here because I keep breaking my head off to look at it. But I think it's because I have glasses on. But I'm going to leave them on. So let's first go through and think about what could happen. And I'm just going to give you a further condition about this. When they say as food is grown, let's think about the way that food is grown now, which in general is monoculture. So what that means is a field of nothing but corn. A field, a culture, a growing of one thing. So let's think about that. So I'm going to write that over here. So I'm going to put that I'm thinking about monoculture, because that is pretty much the only way food's grown anymore. So if you think about what's going to happen with competition, there's going to be just the biggest fight, if you were a farmer, for competition would be with weeds. So that particular food, so you're going to have the crop is going to compete for resources with weeds. So the scary thing is we've done some horrifically radical things to reduce this. We've now got plants that make their own insecticide that are able to be, when they're eaten, it kills the bug that's eating them. And we've got plants that we can spray Roundup on and they don't die. So we can just drown them in Roundup to kill the weeds in order to let the crops. It's really scary, the lengths we're going to maintain this monoculture, instead of just having a regular garden with a whole bunch of stuff in it. Heaven forbid we go back to that. So crops are going to compete for resources. Let's think about what the resources are. Would be sun, right? Be water for the weeds. So this is going to be the competition. And it's between 2 different species. So this would be an example of interspecific competition. Oops, where am I go? All right, so that's the competition piece. So let's think about predation. So you probably don't think about herbivores being predators because the corn can't run, but they are. So you've got predation by herbivores So they're going to have herbivory. So it's going to be where that they're going to eat so that they're going to be also consuming the crop. So these all link back together. So if you think about it, if you're herbivores, let's say it's a mouse that's in the corn, you don't want the mouse to eat the corn because the human is wanting to eat the corn. So you've actually got competition for the resource between the human and the mouse. So you're going to have this herbivory piece where that you've put a huge table of food out and basically rang the dinner bell. And then you're going to have to deal with all the organisms that are going to come to dinner. So that's a huge part of growing food. Then you have, so that was both of them. That's got both of them there. You've got all these different relationships with symbiosis. But I want to talk about one in particular. So a lot of organisms, most plants, can't do what's called fix nitrogen. Fix nitrogen means that you can take nitrogen from the air and put it into an organic molecule to use it. Most plants can't do that. So they have a relationship with the bacteria that live at their roots. So you're going to have a symbiosis between the crop and the bacteria, and I'm going to just write nitrogen fixing bacteria, where the bacteria have a safe place around the roots to stay. Water is brought there because of the way the roots draw water. And so they're going to benefit, and then the crop benefits because these bacteria fix air nitrogen, so atmospheric nitrogen, into organic molecules that are in the soil that the crops can use. So there's a lot of interactions going on in something even as simple as just a cornfield. So there's that one. Let's go to 5. Contrast dominant and keystone species on the test. That's for sure. Let's go back over here to 3. Yes, you are on the test. Definitely for coloration. Niche on the test. Competition. Okay, I feel like I'm doing nothing but putting T's, but those are all on the test. So a dominant species is just going to be the species that when you count how many you have of each, it's got the most, as measured by biomass. Not usually the most number, but the most biomass. So a dominant species is going to be the species with the most biomass. So when you look at biomass within the community, they make up the most. That does not mean they have the most impact on the ecosystem. So, but it may not mean that this dominant species has the most impact. In fact, it's not usually the case. Often, I'm heading away. Often, this would be a producer because it's just going to have the most biomass. Keystone species, on the other hand, have you ever played Jenga? You play Jenga and you pull that one little piece of wood out and kind of everything falls apart. That's a keystone species. So it's going to have strong control on the community. Like when they say key, they mean it's the one. And the way that it is, they have what's called a pivotal, let me put this in there, pivotal niche placement. So that means this: their particular job they do is essential. So Lord help with this COVID stuff. We got a good example for that. Although everything to us is essential because, you know, it's crazy. But this would be those things that do an essential job. And when they're removed, the community just falls apart. So when removed, it's going to disrupt the balance in the community. An example, believe it or not, are elephants. They trample when they do what they do and they travel, and it really keeps everything in check. So if they're removed, which they're being killed off and we're losing them like crazy, then without them, that community falls out of balance. And it's going to stay out of balance for a while until it reestablishes itself. Okay, 6, I don't like 6. I'm just going to tell you. I think that it's super common sense, but we're going to go through it. So, in a system with 4 trophic levels, and my head is in the way, I'm over that. Go up here. Quit being a nuisance. Okay. In a system with 4 trophic levels, this is huge because we're working toward our question on Friday. Trophic levels means what organisms eat what. Troph means to eat. So you have plants, grasshoppers, snakes, and owls. How would the addition of more owls affect the plant biomass if you use a bottom-up method or a top-down method? It literally means what it is. Like you start from one to the other. So this is where it makes me sick that y'all aren't here because it's super easy. So top-down method. This means that you're just going to start at the top and see what happens. So, if you look at the 4 plants, grasshoppers, snakes, and owls, owls are at the top. So if you drew this, you would draw this, and you'd have your levels, and your producer would be your plants. Your first consumer, your primary consumer, which in this case is a herbivore, would be your grasshopper. It's hard to think of them as one, but they are. And then, I guess they're saying snakes are going to eat the grasshoppers and owls are going to eat the snakes. So if I increase the owls, if I have more owls, they eat snakes, so I'd have less snakes. And you take it 2 at a time. If I have less snakes, I would have more grasshoppers, right? So here's my next 2. If I have more grasshoppers, you're guessing over here, you know, you'd have less plants. So a top-down way of looking at trophic levels, you end up with this kind of inverse, backwards, everything depends on one goes up, one goes down relationship. So now let's look at it from the bottom up. So let's think about it this way. How would it work to have more owls? Well, from the bottom up, I would say, okay, if I need more owls, if I had more plants, you would be able to have more grasshoppers. If you have more grasshoppers, you'd be able to support more snakes. If you have more snakes, then you would be able to support more owls. So bottom up is going to be they're all increasing or they're all decreasing. So that's the strategy for that. So we're going to add something here at the bottom. And we're going to go through this boom or bust piece. Because if you remember, we went through the carrying capacity, which is one of the 2 possibilities of, hey, I'm growing, and then you hit limiting factors. So there's a carrying capacity way that organisms go through limiting factors, and then there's the boom or bust. So we're going to talk more about the boom or bust. So if you look at the population size, which is often N, capital N, and over the number of generations, because the cycle happens with every generation, you're going to have a ridiculously rapid increase in the population size, like tons of babies, and then the majority of babies die. Same thing, tons of babies, and it just has this constant, so it would repeat itself, okay? It has this constant up and down way of doing things. So this is a different strategy that organisms have. So later we're going to talk about strategists that are N strategists, because that's what this is from, or K strategists, and you'll see the difference between the way that they actually function with those limiting factors in the environment. But if you think about this particular strategy, this is going to be your type 3 survivorship. For motor Vigo. Holy moly, survivorship. Okay, so I totally left off like 2 letters, survivorship curve. So when you go back here, they're the ones that's what this is. They're the ones that have the numbers they have. Everybody's born, and then immediately most of the young die. Okay, so they had high numbers. Let's look at boom or bust over here. Okay, this is silly. Okay, so we're going to let this look here. So you had high numbers. I'm over that. I'm so over that stupid little thing. One more time so you can see it. So this is my curve, and over here is the boom or bust. So I had high numbers. That's what this is. You had this high numbers because this is birth. So up here's the high numbers, and then almost immediately the majority of them die. So then I'm going to put most young die. And then you rapidly have them grow to adulthood. They have short lives. And they're going to throw a bunch of babies again, of which most of them die. A few make it, they quickly grow to adulthood, and they throw a bunch of babies, and most of them die. So this is boom or bust. And it's a different way of dealing with the amount of resources in a space. So you by far over produce your birth, your young, and then you let the limiting factors get them to where the best ones live, and then you turn around and you do this just cycle after cycle. All right. You are the best. I think you're wonderful.